ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to walk you through how to do a proper pre-trip on a school bus with air brakes. To make sure that it's sitting level, indicating that we have no tire or suspension issue. I'm also looking for puddles underneath the bus to make sure that there's no leaks. Once I do that, I'm going to start up at the top. I'm going to check my clearance lights at the top of the bus, my 8-way red and amber, my turn signals on both sides, and my headlight signals on both sides. I'm going to check to make sure that they're all secure, no cracks, breaks, and clean. Once I get to this side of the bus, I always like to unlatch my hood just to be ready later. I'm going to check my flat and convex mirror to make sure they're securely mounted and properly adjusted, which I'll do during my driver department. I'm also going to check to make sure that my crossover mirrors on a school bus are properly secured, no cracks, breaks, and clean. My bumper is nice and secure with no missing bolts. My cross arm has no broken or missing components and is securely attached to the bumper. Checking the other crossover mirror. Once I get to this side, I like to pop the hood too. Check this mirror. Also, before I open the hood, school bus is properly labeled, and I'm double checking my windshield and my wiper blade arm. Once I've got all that checked, use the handhold to open the hood nice and safely. Next, I'm going to go start on the driver's side of the engine compartment. I first did start by inspecting my air lines, make sure there's no leaks, properly secured and mounted going through the firewall. I then check my compressor, which is gear driven, no missing bolts or leaks. I then move on to my coolant system. My reservoir is securely mounted and above the add mark. None of my hoses have rub marks or leaks. My radiator is secure. My fan shroud is secure. My radiator is secure. My fan shroud is secure. Fan blades are all intact, no cracked or broken or missing fan blades. I have a belt-driven alternator, which has less than 3/4 inch slack, no fraying or tears in the belt. I move on to my power steering system, which has a reservoir that's at the at or above mark, securely mounted with no leaks. My power steering lines and hoses all are secure with no leaks. It is a gear-driven power steering pump down there, which is securely mounted with no missing bolts. Next, I would check my transmission dipstick, make sure it is at the at or above while running in neutral. I would then check my oil while not running at the add or above mark. My steering column has less than 2 inches of play, which I'll demonstrate later. My gearbox is securely mounted with no missing or broken bolts and no excessive fluid leaking. My pitman arm, drag link, and tie rod are all secure with castle nuts in place and cotter pins not missing and no excessive wear in any of the ball sockets. Next, I'm going to inspect my leaf spring mount and hanger to make sure there's no broken or missing bolts. And then I'm going to inspect my leaf spring to make sure there's no broken, missing, or shifted leaf springs. My U-bolt is securely mounted to the axle with nuts in place. My shock is securely mounted with bolts with no excessive fluid leak. My frame has no cracks, breaks, or welds. I would check underneath the bus for cross members to be secured and no excessive pitting from rust.
Next, I'll be inspecting my brake airline for the ABCs, abrasions, bulges, and cuts. My brake chamber is securely mounted with bolts in place with no dents or rust holes. My slack adjuster is auto-adjusting with less than 1 inch of play. We'll continue to inspect through the viewing hole my brake shoes to make sure they are nice and thick, not cracked or broken. Also looking for contaminants. I can also inspect the rear side of the brake drum to make sure there are no heat cracks or holes. I can then view through the rim holes, the brake drum, continuing to check for heat cracks and holes. I'll be inspecting my inner and outer wheel seal for no grease leaks, checking all my lug nuts to make sure they're in place, none broken or missing, no rust or shiny spots to indicate loose, inspecting my rims for cracks, breaks, dents, or welds. I have a matched set of radials with no less than 4/30 seconds of tread. Recaps are not allowed. Checking my ABCs, no abrasion, bulges, or cuts in the tire. My valve stem is properly located with a cap. I would check to manufacturer specification if I had a gauge.
When I come around to the other side of the bus to inspect the engine bay compartment, first going to start with my air box to make sure it's securely mounted. I'm going to inspect the exhaust system, the turbo clamps, exhaust manifold bolts, make sure there's no black sooty marks to indicate a leak. I'm going to inspect my alternator to make sure it's securely mounted, which is belt driven, checking for frays and tears in the belt. Checking my wiring to make sure there's no frays, also checking the rest of the wiring under the hood so there's no frays or rub marks. Last but not least, check our windshield washer reservoir to make sure there's fluid in it, which I will demonstrate later that it works. I would then check the axle the same as I did on the other side. Would you like me to? I always like to latch my hood. Next, you're going to be required to do an exterior firewall back. So, starting at the firewall, our mirror's attached behind the firewall. Check my mirrors, flat and convex. Door opens and operates. My first stopping point is going to be right here at this reflector.
I'm checking my clearance lights to make sure I have red to the rear, amber everywhere else. I'm inspecting my window glass, make sure there's none broken or cracked and clean. I'm inspecting that my emergency label is properly labeled with reflective tape all the way around. My school district is properly labeled. I have a securely mounted turn signal. Next, I'm going to inspect my fuel system here. I'm checking to make sure that I have a fuel cap, tank, and lines all securely mounted with no leaks. Looking for puddles under the bus. Once I'm done with my fuel system, I'm going to continue to the back, and I'm going to lean down, and I'm going to peek through to look underneath the bus here. I'm inspecting my drive shaft to make sure it has no dents or bends and is free and clear of debris. Checking my U-joints for excessive wear and to make sure that my safety U-hangers are in place. We're now going to move on to the rear axle of the vehicle. We're going to start with our front mount, making sure it's securely mounted to the frame with no missing bolts or broken. The bushings aren't excessively warm. The leaf spring has no broken or missing leaf springs. Attaching back to the airbag with a top and bottom plate. Securely mounted with no missing bolts. Both airbags. We're checking the ABCs, abrasions, bulges, and cuts. I'm then going to inspect that my sway bar is securely mounted with no excessive wear. My U-bolts are securely in place with no broken or missing nuts. My shock is securely mounted to the frame and axle with no missing bolts, with no excessive fluid leaking. My frame has no cracks, breaks, or welds. I'm also inspecting the frame for cross members and no excessive pitting from rust. Inspecting my brake line for abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and no leaks. My brake chamber is securely mounted with no missing bolts. Brake chamber has no dents or holes in it. I'm also inspecting my slack adjuster to make sure it has less than 1 inch of play and is auto adjusting. My S-cam is securely mounted with no missing components. I then can view through the viewing hole that my brake shoes are nice and thick with no contaminants. And then would inspect my drum for no heat cracks or holes.
We have an outer and inner wheel seal. I'm going to be looking for grease that gets slung up to indicate an issue. There's none present. I have all lug nuts in place and tight, no rust or shiny spots to indicate loose. My rims have no dents, bends, cracks, or welds. And my tires are free and clear of debris in the middle. I have a matched set of radials with no less than 2/32 of tread. Recaps are allowed. While inspecting the tires, I'm looking for weather cracking, chunks, tears, or bulges in the tire. Last but not least, our valve stem holds the air in. It's properly located on both tires, accessible with a valve cap in place. If I had a gauge, I'd check to the manufacturer's specification. Once I've inspected my mud flap, which this bus is equipped, I'm going to check my lift door, make sure it opens and operates smoothly. There's no rust or corrosion or broken hinges. I'm also inspecting to make sure that there is weather sealing all the way around the door and it operates and closes smoothly.
Once I come around to the back of the bus, I like to start at the top, checking my clearance lights, my 8-way overheads, my turn, brake, backup, and tail, and reflectors to make sure they're all secure, clean, and not broken. I then inspect school bus up at the top, it's properly labeled. I then check my emergency exit to make sure it's properly labeled and there's no broken glass and reflective tapes in place. I'm going to open my back door to make sure my safety catch works. Door operates smoothly. There's no rust or broken hinges. I'm going to make sure that that bus has a seal intact all the way around the door and then it closes and seals properly. I'm then going to be inspecting my bumper to make sure it's securely mounted, intact with no missing bolts. I'm then going to inspect my exhaust system. I would be looking under the bus to make sure that all the hangers and brackets are in place, none broken or missing. I'm also going to look for rusting and black sooty marks to indicate leaks. I'm now going to proceed around to the other side of the bus and check what's different. On this side of the bus, I have a one-sided labeled stop sign securely mounted with lenses intact. I then proceed up. I would check everything else the same. I have a second stop sign that is labeled on both sides securely mounted with lenses. I then would check my battery box for damage and that the door operates. I would then inspect the batteries inside to make sure that they're not swollen, securely mounted, and no excessive corrosion on the wires.
Ladies and gentlemen, at the start of your passenger section, you're going to inspect your cross arm down here. As I begin to go into the bus, I'm going to inspect my door, my glass, free and clear, not broken. Checking my door seals, make sure they're in place, not rotted. As I'm checking my tread steps, I'm making sure that there's no catch points, peeling, or excessive wear. Inspecting my handrail, making sure there's no catch points and securely mounted with no Up into the bus, I'm going to continue to check the tread step. Once I get all the way up into the bus, I always like to turn my key ignition on, turn my dome lights on. I will then proceed through the bus, inspecting the seats, frames, to make sure that they're securely mounted to the floor and no cracks. I then inspect the seat bottoms to make sure they're secure to the seat frame. And I would do that all the way through the bus. Once I get to my emergency exit, I'm going to make sure that my emergency exit is properly labeled with instruction and audible sound. When I get to my wheelchair lift, I'm going to inspect to make sure there's no broken or missing components, no fluid leak on the bottom. Also, out of normal inspection, I would open the door and operate the lift to make sure it operates properly. Emergency door is properly labeled. I'm going to inspect the door to inspect to make sure it has the instructions. Audible alarm. I then would proceed to check my roof hatches to make sure. Would you like me to check them? They're going to say no. To finish off my passenger section, I'm going to check. I have 3 reflective triangles, a sealed body fluid cleanup kit, a properly charged and rated fire extinguisher, securely mounted, a first aid kit, securely mounted, a child passenger mirror, securely mounted with no broken brackets. Now I'll begin my driver compartment. 3 triangles, body fluid cleanup kit, fire extinguisher properly rated, first aid kit, properly adjusted passenger child mirror. Outside this window will be resettable fuses on the electrical panel. Some buses may be required to have extra fuses. Check my seatbelt to make sure it latches, unlatches, retracts, and that there's no frays. I'm going to turn the ignition on, check that my ABS warning light comes on, and once the vehicle starts, that the ABS light goes out. I'm then going to check that my oil pressure, water temp, and voltage warning lights all go out and start to rise. RPM gauge works, my speedometer worked on the way up, and fuel gauge was at a half tank. We had it filled before we came up, could be anywhere. Alright, next we're going to check our indicators on the dash. We have our left turn signal indicator, right turn signal indicator, hazard indicators, high beam indicator. Last but not least, we actually check our dash lights that they come on. While I'm on this turn signal shifter, I'm going to check my washer fluid. It does squirt. My wiper blade's white. No rips or tears on my wiper blades. My windshield is free and clear of debris with no illegal stickers, no chips, cracks, or breaks. Once I come up, I'm going to check my steering wheel for less than 2 inches of play. My horn works. I'm going to close my door. My amber warning indicator comes on. I open my door. My red indicator comes on. My door opens and operates smoothly. See that my crossarm out front operates and comes out. Doors and crossarm operate smoothly and come back. I'm then going to check my defrost heater. low, high, defrost fans, low, high, and my auxiliary heater, low, high. That completes my part in here. Before I start my brake check, I'm going to shut the bus off and turn the child passenger alarm off. To do that, you must get out, turn the key into accessory, and go open the back emergency door. Once you've opened it, that alarm goes off. You now can come back up and get back in your driver's seat. Once in your driver's seat, once I am back in my driver compartment with the child alarm off, I'm going to turn my key ignition to the on position, firmly put my foot on the brake, releasing the park brake. Sometimes you have to press and unhold the brake pedal to get the gauge to settle. Then you would ask your instructor, at this time, can you please set a timer for 60 seconds and time me and let me know when the time is up. I'm checking for less than 3 PSI loss over 1 minute. All right, I've had no PSI loss over 60 seconds. Thank you. At this time, I'm going to continue to fan my brakes with nice firm presses at or before 60 PSI. My brake warning indicators come on. I'm going to continue to fan no lower than 20 and no higher than 45. My park brake should manually set. Oh, look, there it happened. All right, now I'm going to start the bus back up. While it is building up pressure, I will either ask the instructor or if the instructor would like me to go remove the park blocks. I'm going to continue to wait to do my brake check and pull forward until I hear my governor kick off again. Slightly giving it gas to rev up. There was my governor kick off. It was a little sound. Now, I will firmly put my foot on the brake, put it in gear, tapping the gas, just slightly, brake holds, firm on the brake, park brake off. I'm going to roll forward up to 5 miles an hour, gently press on the brake. The brakes do not pull left or right, indicating no issues. I am done with my driver compartment and brake check.